Toronto, Mike.
How you doing?
Very well. How are you?
Good to meet you.
You too. Where are you at?
Like Islington and Lakeshore area. Where
Yeah,
whereabouts are you?
I'm on the Scarborough Bluffs.
Oh, I just bike there, so like I'm far away from there, but I did a bike ride to check it out and take photos just like about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
67-kilometer round trip to bike to Scarborough Bluffs and back.
that I did a bike trip yesterday just out to Ashbridges Bay. And yeah, so going all the way out to, did you say Islington?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
yeah,
Islington and Lakeshore.
that's a hike. So you so you must have so you bike trailed all the way along the waterfront. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Like
haven't. The farthest I've gone is to the CN Tower and back here.
okay. Okay, but that's good too. Good for you. Good for you.
Well, round trip, that's about, it's about 30 kilometers. Yeah.
All right, my friend. Well, that's actually 30 is like my default setting. I like to do 30, but this one day I'm like, I never see the Scarborough Bluffs because of how far it is from me.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I gotta see this with my own eyes. But anyway,
Yeah.
is it okay we jump right in? Only because I know
Go.
you don't have all the time in the world, and I gotta say, lots of questions for you. So ready
Hit
to
it.
rock? Okay,
Hit
hit
it.
it. All
As
right,
long as the questions are about biking across the city, that's fine.
I would do that. So you know who you're talking to here. All right, here we go. When I announced on Twitter that Gowan was finally making his Toronto Mike debut, I was inundated with questions and comments, and two key ones right off the top before we go any further. We have to address this. These belong to a couple of other Mikes. Recycle Mikey says, is he back to Larry, or should we keep calling him Lawrence? And Mike Grogoski writes, can you ask him if he prefers to be referred to as Larry, Lawrence, or Gowan?
Right.
What's the answer?
It is all of the above, quite honestly, because I get all of the above every single day. It's funny because I break my life into segments of you know, I was I was first Lawrence Gowan up until I was 8 years old, and in the hockey, when I was playing hockey, minor hockey, in the dressing room, the coach went around the room and said, "Okay, what's your name?" The first kid's saying, "Joe." "What's your name?" "Jimmy." "Okay, yeah, what's you?" "Bob." He goes, "Yeah, Tom." "Yeah, you." "Lawrence." I went. He goes, "And you go, hold on. Lawrence isn't a hockey player's name. Your name's Larry." So I was given the Larry name, and it stuck with all the hockey people that I played with all the way growing up. However, my family always referred to me as Lawrence. In the 80s, I dropped all first names because you were only required to have one name in the 1980s, but by I think by law. So it was just Gowan. So it was that for at least the next 10 years. Then I put out an album called Lawrence Gowan, but you can call me Larry.
Right.
And then when I joined Styx in 1999, they absolutely insisted on calling me Lawrence Gowan. They just, I remember Tommy Shaw's wife said, "I heard somebody call you Larry. You're not a Larry. You're really just not a Larry." I'm like, okay, okay. And so it was Lawrence Gowan all the way through Styx. So truly all of the above. And that's the longest answer I've ever given to that question.
I love it. Listen, this is where we go in depth. So,
Yeah, of
we need that kind of thoughtful answer. So, can I call you Larry?
course.
I like that, Larry. I think it's cool. Okay. Now, you mentioned hockey. I co-host a show with Mark Hebsher, and Hebsy wants me to ask you, who was your favorite hockey player as a kid?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a terribly moving target. I think the first hockey player I was very cognizant of loving was Frank Mahovlich.
Mm.
Like I just was enamored with as of when I was 5 years old. In fact, I remember being so um, uh, possessive that Frank Mahovlich was my favorite player that I remember one of my dad's friends asked me, "Who's your favorite player?" And I said, "Frank Mahovlich." He said, and I'm 5 years old, and he goes, "Really? He's mine too." And I thought, oh no, no sharing. He's mine. You pick another guy. And shortly after that, it went to I really loved Dick Duff. It's all Leafs, of course. Uh, I can go through the list. I wound up being able to play some of those games with those guys as adults, and it was very weird for me because I just venerated so much their whole existence in the 1960s. So meeting, meeting. Bob Nevin and Dave Keon and Mike Walton, and these players were just amazing to me. Yeah, amazing people. And I think the biggest of all was Jim Pappin, because Jim Pappin, he scored the last goal that was the winning goal for the Leafs winning the Stanley Cup. He came to a show a couple of years ago in California. I guess he lives there now. Came to a show, and I had made a big deal of the fact that he was coming to the show because of the Chicago connection. That's with Styx, and he brought me a Leaf sweater, with his old number on there, 18, and signed and everything, and one of his hockey cards. And that again was amazing moment that I had Jim Pappin backstage after a show. So there's there's a litany of my favorite Leafs of all time, who are probably my favorite hockey players.
Well, listen, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Shout out to Ridley Funeral Home, but we lost Jim like 6 weeks ago. He passed away.
Not know that. I'm
so sorry, man. I know. I was. Yeah.
When you're on tour, especially, you can sometimes miss that kind of news. And if I was home, I would have heard that for sure. I'm really sorry to hear that. Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. He loved the show. It was great to have him there, and such a lovely guy. So I'm
amazing. You gave him some great memories there in his final years, for sure.
Very sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Speaking of, sorry.
Thanks for telling me, but I'm very sad to hear that.
Yeah, my condolences. Now you had some good memories of playing hockey there, and Bruce Barker. So I should preface this by saying, so Mark Hebscher is an FOTM, Bruce Barker's an FOTM. I'm about to tell his great story here. You, Larry Gowan, are now an FOTM. That's friend of Toronto Mike. Welcome to this exclusive club.
Fantastic. I've always pronounced it Fodham. Thank you.
Ask him what That's great. Ask him what it was like playing hockey on the ice at Maple Leaf Gardens with me doing the play-by-play.
Bruce Barker. Yes,
Barker. We called it the Scarborough Donut Hockey League.
That's right. We had the Scarborough Donut Hockey League. We were the Donuts. With a fantastic sweater that I think my brother Pat came up with. It's a donut with all the glazing melting and a hockey stick jammed through the hole. And we played a number of tournaments around Southern Ontario, and myself and my two brothers were on the team. We had some ringers there, and we won a few of them as well. And mostly in the 90s is when we did that, but that's when we got a chance to play at Maple Leaf Gardens, and Bruce Barker did the play-by-play. It was all historically recorded on wonderful VHS tape that's beautifully torn and falling to pieces today, but I think we've had it digitized. A few things surprised me about Maple Leaf Gardens. First of all, the ice was, how can I say it? It was not great. It was nothing like the arenas that around Toronto, that have really nice hard ice. It was fairly soft, and I couldn't get over how warm it was in the building, and it gave me yet another level of appreciation, realizing these guys have to imagine if the stands were full. The stands were not full when we played there, by the way. There were maybe about 3 or 4 people, Bruce being one. And I do remember, though, thinking, man, to play in this kind of heat with your full gear on and the arena full, my appreciation went up a few more notches that day.
That's why Dougie Gilmore couldn't keep his 140 pounds on that frame, like eating the pasta between periods, I think. So.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so you're chatting with me now from beautiful Scarborough, Ontario, and Scarborough, though not its own city, but a great borough in the city of Toronto. Here, I'm calling from Etobicoke here, but you were born in Scotland, and Craig M wants me to know, could you chat briefly about your Scottish roots and how often do you get back to Scotland?
Yeah, so I've always been I love the fact that I'm the only kid in our family that was born a foreigner. I was born in Glasgow. I'm an immigrant to Canada at a very young age. I came here, I like to say, against my will, but I had no will at the time. And but I'm very much, it's funny about where you're born. I don't know if you we probably just project this type of thing on. But whenever I go back to Scotland, I do have this feeling of the earth being what I'm connected to in kind of unusual ways, and I can't quite verbalize exactly or articulate it any further than that. It's a feeling. However, my dad is Irish from Northern Ireland, and so I have that side of my family as well. And I think part of us moving to Canada was due to the troubles, as they called them. I just watched the movie Belfast, and that really beautifully, succinctly puts the whole story into perspective. I think my mom was concerned that because my dad was from Northern Ireland, that we would probably wind up moving there, if anywhere. So I think the compromise country was Canada. And Canada at that point in the late 50s was very, very much British influenced. And my dad was in the Royal Navy, even though he was Irish. And he was in the Royal Navy for 11 years. He was a sailor, and in the Second World War. I think he felt an immediate affinity and kind of a connection to his home coming to Toronto, because it had such a strong British background. Funny enough, the Protestant Catholic balance was about the same as it was in Northern Ireland, and he was always very comfortable being around most of his friends were Protestant, and even though he was a Catholic. And so I think there was a balance there. And where I grew up in Scarborough, which is about 5 miles away from where I live now, from where we're speaking, it was almost all of the families had either an English, Irish, or Scottish accent, the parents, and so it was really, it's amazing. We were just talking before coming on air, when I ride my bike through that neighborhood now, and I got back into that in the COVID times, in the lockdown period. It's amazing now, where I used to ride my bike through that neighborhood and it was nothing but the smell of roast beef and mashed potatoes. And now I ride my bike through that neighborhood and I'm smelling all these exotic curries and spices and all kinds of things that we never went near. And so it's again, another great experience about riding a bike is that you really are a participant in the whole adventure that you're on. And by the way, you're also 12 years old again if you ride through your old neighborhood.
Right.
So that's where I grew up. And bringing music into this conversation for a second, it was a fantastic crossroads for music, for musical, being exposed to everything great in American music, everything great in Britain, that cross current in the early 60s was amazing to be around and to live through that. And then to start to hear Canadian bands and know that, Canada has a whole, part in this as well, in this wonderful musical game that's going on around the world that makes life so fantastic.
Wow. Okay. I hear this from comedians too, like fellow Scarberian Mike Myers, that American comedic influence combined with the British influence that was so prevalent really did create that unique Canadian sense of humor.
I'm glad you bring that up, because Mike Myers, I know I never met him. I've only ever met Paul, his brother, but he was maybe only a couple of miles at most, maybe a mile and a half from where we grew up. And it's funny when I would see even when back in his early days of SNL, but particularly Wayne's World, it was all that Scarborough humor. He kind of distilled it all down into one guy. Even the names that he chose were like, yeah, I knew a Wayne, I knew a Campbell, I knew like everything about it was entirely Scarborough driven. And of course, he brought up the Gasworks, which was kind of a second home. That was my college years.
Oh, don't worry. I have a Blair Packham question about the Gasworks for you.
Beautiful.
Just a moment here. Yeah, it's funny. Paul Myers, of course, from the Gravelberries. Let's bury that lead there. Get it back to music. Also an FOTM like yourself. But Glenn Gabriel. So he wanted to know, what instruments did you play at Neil McNeil High School? You were in the Neil McNeil High School band. He says he heard, I don't know if he went there, but he says he heard that in grade 9, you were playing the clarinet, but can you give us, for the record, what were you playing there?
In truth, I was holding a clarinet. I wouldn't actually qualify it as playing it. There was a sound coming out of the other end that was clarinet-esque, let's call it that. Honestly, we had a great music teacher at Neil McNeil, a man named Rostashio, and he was particularly adept at teaching music to people who had no musical aptitude whatsoever, and having them be fairly proficient by the time they left high school. And it was one of the things that attracted me to that high school, was I knew they had a great music program. In truth, whenever there would be a concert band playing, I would either play guitar or piano, because we started to have rock arrangements of various concert band musical bits. For the rest of it, I guess I could hack my way through the clarinet as not terribly. And then later on, we took strings and I took cello, and that actually led to one of my first really uncomfortable moments on stage. I was in grade 12, so it was my last year, and strings are a whole different bag. And I remember when we started this in front of in the auditorium, which was also the gymnasium, it sounded like the quintessential orchestra of cats, that rocking chairs are going over their tails and they are screeching and howling in agony. That's what it sounded like. And I broke into convulsive, uncontrollable laughter. And to the point where, the cello, you're sitting there playing like this, and I wound up having to actually put my head down, my full forehead right on the top of the thing, because my shoulders were like, I just could not stop laughing. And I was severely reprimanded for that, for my poor stage
decorum. Was that decorum?
Decorum on stage was not what it should have been on that night. And they were right. So, every detention I earned.
Wow. Now, okay, I promised David Schultz, he wants to know what was Eric Duhacek like in high school? Do you remember Eric in high school at Neil McNeil? Eric Duhacek, a sports writer now.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And David Schultz, a retired sports writer with the Globe and Mail himself.
I see. Okay. I wonder if Eric and I were actually in the same year. I might have known him just as Eric. So I don't have specific memories of him. When you said Eric, I thought you were going to say Eric Farquharson, who was a good clarinet player, by the way.
Okay. Okay. I knew a Farquharson in my high school, but a Marianne Farquharson, but I wonder if they're related. But okay, let's get you to, I realize now I have 6 hours of questions. Mike's got to do some editing here, but okay. Johnny the Hare's question ties nicely with Blair Packham's question. And many people wanted to ask you about Rheingold. Okay, so tell me, what the heck is Rheingold? What was your involvement with Rheingold? And Blair Packham would love some Gasworks story if you have any.
He shall have them. So Rheingold, first of all, the name is stolen entirely from a Wagnerian opera. Richard Wagner has an opera called The Ring Cycle, and the first of which is called Das Rheingold. And that was a German accent, if people are keeping score.
Pretty good, by the way. I worked for a German software company for several years, and you nailed it. You nailed it.
Oh, that's good. So Rheingold was named that because after high school, I went to the Royal Conservatory, on Bloor there. Of course, I'm sure you know the beautiful
Avenue Road in Bloor, around there?
Correct. That absolutely stunning building that's still there and standing strong. And I actually did an evening there of songwriters circle that Blair Packham put together, and that was about 5 or 6 years ago. Anyway, I wanted something that had a lot of classical weight to it, because classical music had informed so much of the progressive rock of the early 70s, and it's really what, seeing Rick Wakeman and Keith Emerson and Elton John and Freddie Mercury, knowing that these guys all studied classical music, made me throw myself really into the conservatory heavily for a couple of years, where I did nothing but play the piano. And I wound up getting an ARCT in classical piano performance. And the songs that I wrote in that era, were the first songs I was writing, were very classically influenced. That was the progressive part of the rock that was in them. And that's the band that wound up playing I think we played in total 14 weeks at the Gasworks over a 5-year career, so we would play there at least 2 or 3 times a year for an entire week. And the Gasworks it's probably the most legendary Toronto club as far as rock goes. You could argue the Colonial or even the Piccadilly Tube was very strong for rock as well. But the Gasworks in particular, in the 70s, 80s, was really, that was the pinnacle of clubs you could play, because your next stop from there was perhaps Massey Hall or Maple Leaf Gardens or a used car lot. It was one of those three choices were going to eventually come up in your life. So the Gasworks was a fairly small club. It would only held maybe 350 people, but they were the most devoted rock audience you could ever play to. They kind of knew all the bands that came through and played on Yonge Street of that era. I recently did for the Triumph documentary. I remember speaking about that on one night, on any given night, between sets, I could leave the Gasworks, walk 1 block up and see Triumph playing, say at the Forge. I could walk 3 blocks down and see Max Webster playing at the Piccadilly Tube. I could come back and go up to the Chimney and see Rough Trade, and could be back down and see one song of each band and then be back for our next set. Wow. All of that while dressed entirely in leotards and pretty extensive makeup on my face that allowed me entree to either bathroom, male or female back then.
Right. How convenient.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So when people submit a question for you, Larry, yeah, you're right. Even I'm Lawrence, Larry, Gowan. You don't mind, so I'm gonna call you. I'll mix it up.
Gowan, whatever you want.
Gowan. Absolutely. Well, when you first broke, which we're about to get to here, but I guess around 85 or whatever, whenever a Criminal Minds showed up on Toronto Rocks or whatever, and I'm like, what the hell is this magic? This is wonderful. We're about to talk about it. But I have cousins. So my mom's, happy birthday to my mom. It was her birthday yesterday. But my mom's sister married a Gowan. So these cousins were Gowans, and we had great fun in my family that there was a Gowan now, and they were Gowans, and that was an amusing story to only a few people in my close.
No, same spelling, Gowan.
Yeah. So he's actually passed away, but Bruce Gowan, Big Bruce, we called him. So Bruce Gowan from Creemore, I guess where is he from? Creemore. But yeah, if you know any Gowans from Creemore, that would be. The Creemore Gowans. But anyway.
The Creemore Gowans, they were some of the finest Gowans I've ever not met.
Ask one who's known me. Okay, so because people send in these questions, I have to read them regardless. So you can give yes or no's to these ones. Got to get into a criminal mind here. But
yeah, sure.
Drew wants to know, does Gowan remember my first concert in the 80s where the Spoons opened for him at Niagara Falls Arena? Do you remember this show for Drew?
I absolutely do. Yes, that was 1987. That was the Great Dirty World Tour, where we did across Canada, and the Spoons were the opening band every single night. And I do remember Niagara Falls, and it was does he have any specific?
No, he just wants to know if you remember it. I think some people when you're their first show, like I noticed this when I talked to the guys from Chalk Circle. It's like, okay,
yes.
It's like you kind of want to know, do you remember playing for me when I was a young person, and that was the first concert I ever attended?
I've asked the same question of Burton Cummings, because my first concert was the Guess Who, and yes, I do remember it. I remember playing that Niagara Falls Arena twice. Well, I remember playing it with Honeymoon Suite in I think 86, and then the following year in 87, playing it with the Spoons on the bill.
And you'll get this, I know, but what do the Spoons and Honeymoon Suite have in common? Like, I mean, they have many things common. What is one specific person that they have in common?
I know that Rob Pruce was the keyboard player for both bands.
That's it. That's what I'm looking for. And
the other thing in common that I have with Honeymoon Suite is currently Peter Nunn is the keyboard player for Honeymoon Suite. He was the keyboard player with me in the 80s, between 85 and 90, I believe. So there's another connection there.
Write this down.
Yeah.
Multiverse Andy wants to know, do you remember playing upstairs at the Riverside in Oakville in the 80s? A short DJ friend is asking. So I don't know if Andy is the short DJ who's asking. Multiverse Andy is how he referred to himself on Twitter. But you remember this show?
I remember a specific thing about that week. That's with Rheingold, by the way. That's not Gowan, right? I do believe. I don't believe.
Okay, you would know best. Yes. Okay.
I do believe that. So I think it was probably around 1980 or maybe early 81. What I remember, this is more of a gaswork story, but it was at the Riverside in Oakville. It was a club that was kind of on the second floor, and a staircase led down the street. A guy in our third set of the night, I think it was, crowd was digging it, but this guy got into the habit of taking ice out of his drink and tossing it at the stage.
Oh.
And, he hit me a couple of times too many, and I wound up running off the stage, running at his table, mid-song, by the way. And you know, I'm not that scary, but when I'm mad, you know, the gloves come off.
And you got the big hair, so you're sort of like a lion.
It could have been that. So I was coming at him, and he got up from his table and ran. And I remember him, he got down those stairs and onto that street so incredibly quickly. And then the bouncers got pissed off at me because they said, "That's our job." And I thought, okay, then do it.
Do your job. One last thing on this. So Mike Lynch says, I met him when I was working at the Muskoka Sands Inn.
Okay.
He said it's now called Taboo, but this was the late 80s, and he just wants to know, ask him if he enjoyed playing at the Key to Bala.
Yeah, very much so. Very, very much so. And in fact, one of the great things that happened just recently is that my son, Dylan, who plays drums with me, with my solo band, and he also plays in a band called Birds of Bellwoods. They played there just about a month ago or so. And the poster, the Gowan poster from the 1980s is still on the wall at the Key to Bala. And I'm very, very proud of that.
Amazing. And that's, to me, that's almost as impressive as becoming an FOTM. Like, that's awesome. Okay.
Cool.
Why did Rheingold break up? I just need to know.
So by 1981, early 1981, we'd had 5 years of really, we had a great following. We knew that we had something unique and strong enough, but timing is everything in showbiz. And we emerged as a progressive rock band. We emerged right as disco was on the ascent. And then as we kind of plateaued and record companies would come out and debate whether they should sign Rheingold or not, punk hit, and we were not a punk band at all. Right. Very much a pretentious prog rock group, and they wanted punk stuff. And even at one point, I tried to dress differently just to kind of see if it was just the outfit they were impressed with in the punk world. It turned out it wasn't. I was a few clothespins or safety pins short, and the band really. Life moved on. We'd slogged it out for 5 years. We did have a couple of record deals offered, but they were very low tier. Let's call it that. They weren't really. You didn't feel any great commitment, you know, from a major label. So a couple of guys on the same day came to me and just said, "I think I've had enough. I think I want to get married. I want to move on with my life, and I've loved this, etc." And within a few short months, that was the end of the band. The last gig we played was in Guelph at a club called the Chooch. And a few months after that, I basically went back down my parents' basement because I had no money. I was in pretty deep debt for the truck lights and PA of Rheingold, and just started writing songs, you know, on my own and demoing them on my own. And within months, I had two major record deals offered with A&M and with Columbia, who I eventually signed with in 1981. And my first album came out in 1982.
And that album features the aforementioned Kim Mitchell of Max Webster on guitar, right?
A really great lineup on that album. It's Kim Mitchell on guitar, Steve Hogg, who had played with Ian Thomas for a number of years and was on his records and was in the last incarnation of Rheingold. Wow. And he played bass on the album, did some vocals, and a friend of his named Marty Cordry played drums. So it was just the four of us, and a New York producer named Rob Freeman, who had just done the first album of the Go-Go's. That was a huge hit. And there were very, very high expectations for that first Gowan album. But it was commercially, it didn't do well. The timing was off on it. It was very much, I think it still had a little too much feeling of the classic rock of the 70s was still in there.
Right.
Just enough that, again, the timing of that record wasn't quite with what was going on in the 80s. It's funny, when I play those songs now live, we still play Keep Up the Fight, or I hear them, they actually fit really well with a lot of the stuff that I do with Styx, because they really have that 70s classic rock mentality behind them. And people that discover that album, it often ends up being their favorite Gowan record of all.
Well, okay, so we're gonna get to the next Gowan, because there's a couple of cuts on that album that people are still listening to on the daily. But does any audio of Rheingold exist in the universe? Like, could I ever find any Rheingold audio?
Yes, you probably could find, because people did make cassettes of the band. People came out and made cassette tapes of the band. We do have some board tapes. I've never released them, but they do exist. I probably will someday. I actually took a Rheingold song and did it in 2020. Dylan and I did a rendition of it, a live Zoom concert that we did from the Empire Theater in Belleville, and it was fun to play it again. So I think somewhere down the line, some of it will emerge. People will probably make their cassettes, put them online, etc., and eventually some of it will come out. I saw a film of it, unfortunately silent, that is really quite spectacular. It looks like, it's quite amazing. It looked like an old Charlie Chaplin film, although it was in color, being silent, and it wasn't even sped up, but the speed and movement of that band on stage was something to behold. Wow. I can tell you.
All right, so I'm going to actually do a 5-for-1 here. So I'm going to read these, and then you're going to talk about this song. Sure. But Lawrence Nichols, who's, by the way, with Lowest of the Low, we love Lowest of the Low on this show, he writes, is he really so bad? Okay, so hold your replies here, Larry. But then Indigo Mirage writes, can you ask one who's known him if he's really so bad? I suspect he isn't. Scott M wants to know, what was the inspiration for writing A Criminal Mind? I love how evil that song is. And then Sean William Clark, who's a great musician in his own right, writes back, yes, this question. I always thought it would make a great stripped-down Johnny Cash-style outlaw country song. And then Don Landry, who's also an FOTM, writes, ask, what is it that they poured all over him in the Criminal Mind video? And then I'll close with Kevin Glue, who says he's very excited about this Gowan interview. He's always wondered why Criminal Mind, which was one of the defining songs of the last 40 years here in Canada, was not a massive hit in the USA. He's seen you play it during a Styx concert, and he's seen it on YouTube, and American audiences are riveted by it, and he wants to know, how can that song not be a huge hit in the US? So I'm going to shut up now, Larry, and you're going to bury us in Criminal Mind information.
Sure, that's great, because there's all kinds of there's all kinds of ways of looking at those questions. First of all, I think part of the charm of the song is when you ask the question, are you really so bad? Well, we all are, right? That's the truth of it. That's probably the underlying truth that's in that song, is that we all decide to mitigate, or decide how much of the tap of our dark side, let's call it that, we decide to turn on, and how much we leave off, because we are all capable. Humans are pretty terrible. They're pretty terrible people at times. They do have some incredibly redeeming qualities as well. And so it's the balance between those two things that really, I think, the song plays with. Also, the admission of guilt in the song is really, that was the pivotal moment. Even when I was writing it, ask one who's known me if I'm really so bad, I kind of was going to leave it at that. And then I thought, what if he's just honest and says, I'm as dark and as evil and as capable of the worst things as you think I am. Whether I do them or not, that's the difference as to whether I live my life looking through a window or through bars. So the inspiration for the song, I had the melody already and kind of an outline of the chorus, a vague outline of it, but the main melody of the verse, I had that on the piano already, and realized, okay, this is not lyrically, this is not a love song. I don't really know what it should be about, but it should be about something really interesting. And shortly after that, maybe a week or two, I was at the Canadian National Exhibition. And in the automotive building back then, they had all these various displays of Canadian institutions of various description. And one of them was they had transported a cell from Kingston Penitentiary. And this is why a lot of people have been under the impression that I spent time in the Kingston Pen. In a sense, I did, because it was at the exhibition. So
Right.
anyway, I hate to dispel some of these myths, but we're at a time now where I can tell the truth about a couple of things. The guy that was running that exhibit, no one was looking at this thing. No one was interested. They take a passing glance and go, ooh, I'm not, because you could go into the cell, and he had one of the beds there. He actually had a bed dummy that someone had made of paper mache and various clothing, etc., because that's how they would get a decoy from when you wanted to escape from prison. Oh dear, I gave a terrible secret away. So I was speaking to him. He was recently retired, and I asked him about the people that he'd known over the years. He'd worked in Kingston Pen for over 25 years. And that alone was a very interesting conversation about the fact that so many of the inmates were actually his friends. And some of the people that had done the worst things were the best people that he knew, because he said some of them have got it completely out of their system, whatever it was. Some of them most of them would never get it out of their system, and were really spending most of their time incarcerated, thinking about what they did wrong that got them caught, not what they did wrong that caused them to be there. So the word recidivist came into my vocabulary on that day. And he said, then I started talking to him about the cell, and he said, it's one thing to look at the bars from the outside, but go in there. So I went in, he slammed the door shut and locked it. And I realized, this whole feeling of you can't get out means you have to confront all kinds of things within you. It's inevitable. And I went and sat over on the bed by the bed dummy. And I was just sitting, I don't know how long I sat there, maybe half an hour, but the lyrics of the song began to kind of poke me in the head, that melody that you have. And I went home, and the next morning, after a day at the X, you're pretty exhausted. The next morning I woke up, and literally they pretty well fell onto the page within 15 minutes. The whole thing, bang, bang, bang. My brother came home from school in the afternoon. He was still going to school then, and he heard it and made a couple of really cool comments. And I realized this is an unusual song, and I hope I get to record it.
Wow.
So there you go.
I mean, the song, wonderful song, but combined with the video, like I was, what was I, about, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old or something, and that video just like I said, I think I saw it on Toronto Rocks when I watched a lot of Toronto Rocks back then, and it was like just imprinted in, like, and I never forgot that was such a wild video, a great song. It just all kind of came together.
It's funny, the video. What was great about Columbia Records at that time, the team that they had there, the A&R guy Jeff Burns, who we're still in touch with, and the whole team that they had there were the president Bernie DiMatteo. They knew that this was an unusual song that they had a chance to do something very creative with, and they wound up delaying the release of the record based upon the fact that they emphatically said, you've got to make a great video for this that sells it. It can't be too dark because Much Music won't play it, and CBC, and we were coming right into the Tipper Gore kind of stickers on the records kind of era, etc. And so I worked on the storyline quite a lot, and then upon meeting Rob Quartley, we really worked it out. He had a great art department, and I asked, one of the things that's really going to help this is if I can turn into a cartoon character. So something like in the Batman series that I loved in the 1960s with Adam West and Bill Ward, if the show was getting violent in any way, although that was totally campy, the fact that an animated cartoon would come in immediately kind of absolved them of anything being taken overly seriously, even though it was much the same as when I became such a huge fan of South Park. You know, the fact that it's an animated cartoon and it's kids, that opens the door to some very heavy stuff being taken in a different part of your brain, I think, that allows it and is not so resistant to it. So with all of that and getting the team that did the Snap, Crackle, and Pop commercials from Rice Krispies, they wound up, it became a pivotal thing that when I grab from the teacher I'm supposed to be in a reform school, when he's about to kind of crack me with that baton, which turns out to be a flashlight, when he's about to crack me with that baton and I grab it from him and do this, I have to turn into a cartoon, because what's going to happen next is I'm going to become a thief. We don't know how violent I am. We don't really know, but it keeps it in that kind of gray area. The video, of course, by the 1990s and early 2000s, it looked very campy. And now when I look at it, it looks like it's very much succinctly of its era, and stands up quite well. And in fact, I wound up doing a comic book of it. I should have a copy with me that I can hold up. There's a comic book that we sell, and we sell them at Styx shows as well, and they always disappear. That basically walks through the video almost frame by frame and tells you that story just through the lyrics of the song. And in the middle, you have a fold out that's the actual piano music to it. Wow. And so that's that. I hope I answered all those questions.
Oh no, one final lingering question there to answer is why was this? And I'm born and raised in Toronto, so I'm always surprised when I find out like a song I would see on Much Music, on high rotation wasn't a big hit. I'm like, oh, what do you mean that wasn't a hit? Just like so why was it not a massive hit in USA?
I'm going to try to encapsulate this really quickly. There were 4 major labels in the world back in the 1980s. It was completely nothing like today, where you and I right now, we have a worldwide release of this conversation we're having. Anyone in the world can watch this. Back then, the music industry, the reason that those 4 labels were so powerful was they were the gatekeepers of all music around the world. They controlled the market. So you wouldn't want to overflood the market with too much, and you decide very, quite often based upon a person's personal career, what got released in foreign countries. So Canada is still a foreign country to the United States, although I was signed to a US label and the US label were supportive. They were very careful, and usually they wanted something to trade off with any foreign country that came in. So for example, being at Columbia, I know through the promotion department, they would say, for example, in Britain, they wanted Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA to break really big, like really, really big. And Britain wanted Wham with George Michael to break big in America. So there was a reciprocal kind of trade-off there. And within the company, I saw that happen, and guys would explain it to me. They'd have a priority list. So because I was managed by Ray Daniels, who managed Rush, there were some instances where he could he wanted to kind of force the hand of the US label. So one of the things was that we flooded certain cities with import records of Strange Animal. Cleveland being one of them, WMMS, it was a critical station. Pittsburgh was another. Of course, Buffalo had our Toronto airplay. And it got into the top 20 there. And he got us onto the Tears for Fears tour. And their record was #1 in America. And with the songs from the Big Chair, and we wound up opening for them, and we went over great, and it just seemed imminent that they would buckle and finally release the record on a proper national release, not just put 1,000 copies in Buffalo, where they disappeared, thankfully. But it never fell right into that category. So other bands from Canada that were, equally deserving never got that shot in America. Today it's completely different, because as I said, I can write a song, put it on my phone, and it's all over the place. So that's the reason behind that. On the other hand, the beauty of it is, even from the one time that I know of that MTV played the A Criminal Mind video. Back then, when I was in America, you would get people that would recognize you because the power of television was so ubiquitous that people still, it's amazing even if it was 3 a.m., there were enough people that would see it and it would register and connect with them. So the great thing is that to this day, the song is still such a big part of my life. When I joined Styx, the first song they asked me to play, I prepared Crystal Ball and Fooling Yourself and Come Sail Away. Before I even started, Tommy Shaw said, this is 1999. He says, no, don't play a Styx song. No, play A Criminal Mind. And the moment I played it, he said, okay, so we'll make that a Styx song now. Wow. And I thought, well, this is how it'll get its second life. And so we still play it occasionally, and probably play it in the next couple of weeks, actually.
Okay, well, since you mentioned a second life here, Larry, have you seen Jordan Peele's Nope?
I went and saw it last week because Jordan Peele, because he tweeted a faux introduction to a 1980s or early 90s, wherever it is, around the Family Ties era, let's call it that, show, and he needed a theme song for that show. And that show is called Gordy's Home, and he used Strange Animal. So I saw that immediately because he tagged Gowan in it, and I saw that on my, what did I see it on Twitter? And I showed it to, we were on the tour bus, and I showed it to Tommy Shaw and to JY and to Todd. And I said, look at this, Jordan Peele's new movie is using Strange Animal. And about 24 hours later, I looked at it again and it said 2.3 million views. And I went, oh, well, that's interesting. I like where this is going. And I suddenly start getting these messages like crazy of people. I saw Nope, N-O-P, Not of Planet Earth, and Strange Animal is in the movie. And it's in a really critical scene where there's dialogue over it, but he's playing the theme song of the show that he's describing as a child actor, this character in the movie. And I'm not going to give anything away, but it's a pretty terrifying and horrific thing that happens on that show, not giving anything away from the movie. But yes, I actually got a message this morning from someone who said they were shushed in the movie theater because the moment it came on, they yelled out strange animal.
Well, that's okay. So Jim Slotek, who's a great writer himself, he wondered how you felt about them using Strange Animal. But can I just read between the lines that you must be pretty happy that you might, I mean, not the same level, obviously, but like we just came off a big Kate Bush renaissance. It might be still ongoing because, this is how, so I got a 20-year-old, I have an 18-year-old, and they discover old music, not because dad says you should listen to this or you're going to love this song. It's because it's in movies like Nope that they're all into. And it's, so there's going to be, whether you like it or not, Mr. Gowan, there's going to be a You Are a Strange Animal bump from this. This is going to be something kids are going to be into now.
Well, how could I not like that? How would it be possible? I was completely not so bad, but actually insane. No, I'm thrilled with it. First of all, you've just discovered something that I witnessed about 12 years ago to where I could no longer deny it. About 12 years ago, we'll call it roughly 2010, I began to notice that at Styx shows, the audience was not skewing older, but skewing younger. And to the point where I'm noticing, wow, about 20% of the 1 out of every 5 people at the show tonight was not even born when the biggest Styx albums came out. And they're singing all the words, and they're not there with an older brother or sister. They're actually in clumps. And then a few months later, I played at Falls View here, a Gowan show, the first Gowan show I'd done in 11 years. And we did 3 nights at Falls View. And each night, right up front, there would be a clump of 4 or 5 younger people who were definitely not alive when Strange Animal came out and would be standing up and singing Cosmetics and Gorilla Soldier, etc. And I was like, classic rock is now establishing itself, it's now firmly established as the great musical statement of the last half of the 20th century, equally as vital and as authentic as jazz was to the first half of the 20th century. It's the musical movement that had an effect all over the planet. So the songs that we thought were pop songs and were very disposable, as it turns out, they weren't that disposable. They actually were typifying or exemplifying the musical movement of the entire planet. And this is me going back to my conservatory music history learning and realizing that the music was actually extremely legitimate. Okay, and those Queen albums, those Led Zeppelin albums, obviously the Beatle albums. Look at what happened with Get Back. Now we're at a point where on any given night, half the audience, 50% of the audience weren't even born when these records came out, but somehow they see themselves in the narrative of these songs. They can take them and personalize them in a way that's concurrent with their own lives. I think so. It speaks to, number one, the power of melody. You know, I'm like an evangelist for this stuff. I'm hard on it. The power of melody. Once a melody gets into your head, it's not going to. If you connect to it, it's never going to actually leave you. Then the second layer of that is if the lyric of it somehow relates to your life in some manner, it's going to stay with you no matter how hard you try to push it out of your brain. It's going to become that earworm, as they call it, that's going to stay with you. So it doesn't matter if you weren't born when Beethoven came out with da 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 da. There's something about that you suddenly go, that's powerful. That has something that is resonating with me, even though, you know, Beethoven's been dust for an awful long time now, right? So I'm just very fortunate that I live in an era where I've been lucky enough to stay alive this long and actually see this happen. And when younger people, for example, on the internet, when they put up fan art and things of that nature, it was actually a fan artist, Ilia St. Ange, who I first noticed and asked her to do the comic book for A Criminal Minds. She's only like early 20s, you know, so she's a millennial. She's, you know, born in this century practically.
Yeah, Generation Z, I think we call that.
And yet they connect to it so well, as she connects to the music of Rush, and she connects to all these you know, things of that era that are still vital and still work. And then when they see it live, I'm going to add this one extra layer to it. When you see something live, and if it's done really well, now that is so cemented in you. And I actually bring this up sometimes in shows. The last show I saw before the pandemic was Elton John. And I was at the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road tour in '73, I think it was. And here I'm at the Farewell Yellow Brick Road tour. And these songs are still mean so much to me and have enriched my life to such a degree that I feel a profound connection with this guy. I just do, you know, not just because he's married to someone from Scarborough. Great taste.
Right. That's true.
Yeah, it was a very good choice. But because those songs have lived so long and I still can feel myself in the narrative. And behind me were a bunch of screaming teenage people, you know, of all description, as into the songs as when I was a teenager watching him play those songs. So what does that say about the longevity of that music? Strange Animal showing up in various, there's all kinds of public, you know, cultural references to it over the years. Have been several, but Nope is possibly the biggest. Well, the fact that it was the #1 box office on the first weekend that it opened, and suddenly I'm flooded with messages about Strange Animal.
Well, he's the hottest director right now, I think, especially amongst that. Yeah, so this is a big. And
I can see why. He's got great musical taste.
Yeah, well, obviously, no, without a doubt, Strange Animal. So you get the big Strange Animal Nope that's happening now. But for me, now I'm going to get very meta here, but I mean, I did an episode with Cam Gordon, 2.5 hours, where we just dove deep into the Degrassi High finale that was School's Out. So Larry, let's just remind everyone that you hear Moonlight Desires in a prominent scene on this during Degrassi's School's Out 1992 TV movie.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for
how did
reminding
that come
me.
to be? Did they just said, hey, we dig, Gowan's great. We love this song. We're going to put it on, or, how did that come to be?
I think basically that was the first kind of cultural reference show, let's put it that way, that began to use the music. And for example, Degrassi was very popular in Australia. Yeah, any messages I get from Australia are because they discovered my songs or whatever through Degrassi Junior
Right,
High.
because All the Lovers in the World is on there as well.
All the Lovers in the World. I think Burning Torches of Hope is in there. That was not a single, but it was on the Strange Animal record. And I did hear that in a scene. It's actually a couple of others. I think there's probably about five songs in total that they used.
You and, was it Harem Scarum?
Could have been.
Yeah, a lot of that. Amazing.
Yeah. So I guess the era that they're trying to depict and that they were in that TV series, and the emotions that were being kicked around in the stories, the songs must have connected to those, in a way that they thought was appropriate. And it's the same with the Jordan Peele movies. The song connects kind of profoundly with the scene that he's with this television show that was back. I mean, the star of the show is a chimpanzee, and he's the mere fact that the first lyric in the song is well, they say I should approach you with caution,
right,
is kind of fits the scenario. Not going to give anything else away.
Yeah, no spoilers. I got to see this. I can't wait. In fact, and I'm going to be the guy who goes, Strange Animal, that's my at 4 p.m. Larry Gowan.
You be that guy. You definitely be that guy. And when it comes to getting tossed out of the theater and they've got your hands behind your back, just go, ask one who's known me if I'm really so bad. Right? Like that. And people will know that guy. That's Toronto Mike. He's so cool.
You and I are in the same wavelength. So I'm cooking with gas. Okay, I'm talking twice as fast. I'm cherry picking. I realize I'm running out of time, and there's so much left here. So cooking with gas, but I know even I have an 11 o'clock recording. I can't bail on either. So we're gonna rock and roll here. So we talked about Moonlight Desires here, with regards to Degrassi, and Rock Golf wants to ask, how did John Anderson of Yes get involved, not only with your debut album, but of course he's singing harmony on Moonlight Desires. I don't know if people know that fun fact, but how did John Anderson get involved?
John, monster Yes fan right here. John was recording for Tangerine Dreams on the soundtrack of the movie Legend in 1986 when we were in Los Angeles making Great Dirty World. And the producer of Great Dirty World, Dave Tickle, who also produced Strange Animal, he was called in to mix, I think, a piece on Legend, the piece that John sings on. And when he went into the studio, he was playing Strange Animal through the speakers, and John heard it and said, I like this, and who is this, and etc. And he said, I'm making a record with this guy. And John came into the studio and listened to a couple of the tracks that we were working on, and he really liked Moonlight Desires. And we were going to put a guitar solo in that section where he does that do 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 do, and instead he was kind of singing. He was riffing all kinds of ways over top of the melody of the song, and it just dawned on us: why don't we have that in the song instead of a guitar solo? And John was extremely magnanimous and lovely guy, and just said, yeah, I'll be happy to do it. And then I mean, phenomenal day in the studio watching him put that bit together that's in the song. Then he and I went to a baseball game at Dodger Stadium. And then after that, the song came out, and when the song was about to come out as a single, they said, we need you to make a video for this one. And I wanted to do it on the Mayan pyramids in Mexico. So I called John, he was in England. And I said, John, I'm going to go make the video for Moonlight Desires. It'll be in around Mexico City on the Mayan pyramids. Would you like to come? And at the time he said to me over the phone, he said, I was just speaking to my channeler. Don't know what that is, but anyway. And she said, someone is going to call you and invite you to a warm climate, and you should go. And whenever I get a chance, infrequently, but over the years, whenever I get to see John, he says that was a very important week in his life, that whole experience of being the Mayan god on top of the the Pyramid of the Sun, and us making that video together was an awakening for him in some manner that he feels very connected to. And I just felt it was great to be such a kindred spirit with one of my idols.
Amazing. I love it. And speaking of idols, I'm a big fan of David Marsden in CFNY. And
Yeah.
My question for you is, do you still have your Casby Award that you won for for most promising male artist?
I should have put them all on top of the piano before this interview and the comic book and everything. Yes, I have my Casby Award. It's yes, it's still
Okay.
it's
You still
still
have it.
And funny enough, I got a message from David Marsden just a few weeks back. He wanted to hear a copy of the new Styx album. So yeah, send him that. So I still hear from some people that are lifers like myself.
You would love so this right now we're recording is episode 1089 of Toronto Mic'd, but you would love episode 1021 of Toronto Mic'd, which has David Marsden and, May Potts and Scott Turner and Alan Cross, but a whole bunch of people just on there talking about the history of CFNY from its launch to present day. And I think you might dig that. So
funny, every one of those people you mentioned had something to do with helping me in my career. So yeah, I would be very interested in 1021.
How about Ivor Hamilton's on this? I'm trying to think who else I can shout out from this CFNY days. But so CFNY also came up. We did this thing during the pandemic called Pandemic Fridays. Stu Stone and Cam Gordon came over once a week, or sometimes via Zoom because it wasn't safe. But we would connect once a week and kick out thematic jams. And this is important. So Casby Awards, of course, was a CFNY award, Canadian artist selected by you.
Yeah.
So they changed their formats, like late 80s, they changed their formats. And by the early 90s, when Humble and Fred are there, they're sort of like, I'd call it alt rock, grunge was breaking. So after, very important here, Larry, but after 1991, does CFNY ever play another another Gowan song? Like, so the Gowan exposure on CFNY was strictly like mid to late 80s. What would you say about that?
You're probably right. You're probably right. I don't know for sure, but whenever I'm in Toronto, if I'm poking around on the radio, obviously Boom is the station that plays Gowan, like to the extent that all stations should play Gowan, and Q107 as well. But two of my biggest stations in the 80s were CFNY and Chum FM, and they have formats that have moved over the years. And I don't know, maybe one day they will start to play those things again. I think in the 90s, because the sound that the records that I did in the 90s were much more acoustic guitar driven, most of them. And those songs were far more singer-songwriter related than what I did in the 80s. I think I probably was not grunge, and I was not new, and I was not so I don't know. I don't know how they come up with these, with exactly what the paradigm has to be. But I would encourage CFNY to hey, get back into it, dudes and ladies.
I hope they're listening. I think they're listening. Now, we're going to jump to Styx real quick, and then if we have time at the end, I'll come back for some of these questions I'm skipping here. But Sammy Cohn, he's the drummer for The Watchmen, another great Canadian band out of Winnipeg. Love those guys. Yes, Sammy Cohn says, I'd love to hear about the Styx audition process for Gowan and what the first few gigs were like. Oh, and if he remembers The Watchmen opening for him in Thorold, is that how you say it? Thorold, Ontario in 1991. When Ken Greer, I should know this, when Ken Greer was his guitarist. So much respect for Gowan. So a lot of people, I want to credit Dark Duck, who wants to know what it was like playing with Styx, and Keith, who wants to know how did the association with Styx. So please, time to tell me how the heck do you ended up singing for Styx?
Okay. So great questions, by the way, and thanks very much for mentioning Kenny Greer, one of the greatest musicians ever in Canada. Most people know him for playing with Red Rider, but he did play on 3 different Gowan albums, and just a phenomenal steel guitar player, just phenomenal. Anyway, in 1997, they opened the new Montreal Forum. We're back to hockey in Montreal, and I was on a morning television show in Montreal promoting an album I had called Gowan au Québec. The year prior, sorry about that. The year prior, I had recorded a live album, just solo piano live album of the hits. in Quebec, and we decided to put it out as an album. Terry Brown produced it, the producer from Rush and Klaatu. And I was on TV promoting it one morning in early June, and also promoting a show that I had later that month in Montreal that Donald K. Donald, the legendary promoter, was putting on. When I got back to the hotel, Donald called and said, I don't want you to do that show. I want you to open for Styx. And at the time, I hadn't opened for anyone in Canada for 14 years. He said, look, it's the new Montreal Forum. You headlined the old Montreal Forum. This is a chance to play the new place. You should do it. And I said, I have no band with me right now. I'm touring totally solo this year. And he said, that's exactly what I want you to do, what you did on TV this morning. So he called Styx manager and said, okay, I'm going to have this guy Gowan open the show at the, and our manager said, Charlie said, how big is his band? We're touring with Pat Benatar right now. We've got it all worked out. He said, it's just him on the piano. Charlie goes, in a full stadium, you're going to have one guy on the piano. So Charlie flew up from Atlanta. He wanted to see the show, to see basically if this guy was going to fall on his face and make Donald look bad. So as it turned out, it was a Hollywood night in Montreal, because there was, everything just went great. And the audience was spectacular, as Montreal audiences can be. And in the encore section, the guys in Styx wound up being standing side stage and watching this and hearing the audience sing all these songs that they were maybe loosely familiar with from touring in Canada. And after the show, Tommy Shaw came up to me, shook my hand and said, we got to do more of that. That was it. That's 1997. And so when they called in early 1999, my assumption on the call was that they wanted to know, would I open shows for them in the United States? That's what I wanted to do, is go and tour there. And then when he said, no, it's not for opening. We actually want to know if you'd be interested in joining the band. And they said, we remember that night in Montreal. He had spoken to a lady named Kim Ouellette in Montreal, who ran his website, who put my name forward and said he would be a great addition to the band. And then Todd Zuckerman, our drummer, had seen me just the previous year, so the intervening year, 98, at the opening of Princess Diana's memorial in Althorpe. I did an original piece called Healing Waters with the London Symphony or the BBC Orchestra at that show. And he said, I just saw that guy again in England, and he that went really great. And he said, I think he'd be the right guy if he would do it. So a couple of days later, I'm there, and I've prepared a couple of Styx songs, and he said, no, play A Criminal Mind. And immediately I just thought, I like these guys. And we seem to be just simpatico in every way. And by the time we'd done our third show, they just said, would you mind staying with the band like permanently? And I said, yeah, I'm enjoying it. Unfortunately, it meant putting aside my solo world for the next 11 years. I didn't do anything at all until 2010 when I did Fallsview. And so it wasn't just a snap decision or an easy thing. You have to give something away in life in order to gain something. And sometimes the thing that you have to let slide is something that's very valuable to you. So now that I have a balance between the two, I'm in a great spot at the moment, and I'm knocking on all pieces of wood, looking at the gods of rock, looking up or looking down, wherever they happen to be, keep smiling upon me, and maybe I'll get on the Toronto Mike Show again someday.
Well, listen, if you play your cards right, you could play the TMLX event. This is the 10th Toronto Mike Listener Experience, which is September 1st from 6 to 9 p.m. At Great Lakes Brewery in southern Etobicoke. So keep doing what you're doing there, Larry. Now, a few quick questions about Styx here. Kevin in Alberta says, ask about the reluctance to play Mr. Roboto live and if he's had a change of heart now. And then, but Scott Carson then comes in and says, what was it like to perform Mr. Roboto with Styx? So what's the story with Mr. Roboto?
I can wrap that up real quick. In my Styx history class, the things that happened long before I was involved in the band, I've only been in the band 23 years now. In the 80s, the album, Kilroy was here, it wound up being a tense experience. That the guys in the band, the guys who are still in the band, they don't look upon that era all that favorably. However, they've never said anything negative about the music of that era, and I was a proponent of saying, look, Mr. Roboto, I used to think of it just as a kind of a kitschy song that you guys did. It stood the test of time. It's a really prescient song, and I think we should do it in some form or another. Well, 4 years ago, we were going on tour. We had Joan Jett opening the shows, and one morning on the tour bus, where most best decisions are made, Tommy said, we should do something different on this tour because it's going to be a different audience with Joan. And why don't we take a crack at Mr. Roboto? And so we did, and we've played it every night since. It's the first, it's in the encore, and I get to sing it. Quite honestly, part of what I love about singing it is the character in the song is someone with hiding a secret that they're dying to reveal. Well, that feels emotionally very similar to another song, A Criminal Mind, and that's why I really relish the moment of singing Mr. Roboto on stage now.
Love it. Now, Vince Incorporated says, Gowan brought a lot of energy to live solo performances. Did you have to dial it down with Styx?
So you have to go see a Styx show. When I first joined the band, the very first rehearsal we had, I had the big keyboard set up, and then they walk on stage and go, hey, wait a second, where's the spinning thing? Because I have a spinning keyboard, right? Because that's what I used since 1990. And I said, well, luckily I brought it with me. We took all the big keys off stage. I put the spinning keyboard up there and showed them all my little monkey tricks. And they said, that has to be part of this. You have to do that. So a Styx show is not a bunch of old guys. Well, it's a bunch of old guys on stage, but they certainly don't act like it. And I've still, on a regular basis, I name myself on my spinning keyboard stand, and I bring all of that, whatever energies I can still put on stage are there every single night.
Okay, I love it. So this is actually working out great, Larry. So in this last 5 minutes, I don't want to leave anything on the cutting room floor that was submitted by a listener. So Sweet and Spicy says, I'd like to know if sitting beside us at a Leafs game in 1992 is one of his fondest memories ever. LOL. He was with John McDermott, who sang the anthems, and both he and Larry were very friendly. Autographs have been hanging on our bulletin board ever since.
That's really nice to hear. John McDermott and I, here's the connection that goes there. We lived in Glasgow, Scotland. I think he's a year older than me. We lived on the same block, and our moms knew each other. Okay, we would pass each other in the prams, which is the carriages, as babies. And we immigrated to Canada before the McDermott family did, and I think they immigrated here in like '64. They had like 11 or 12 kids, maybe 13, I don't know. But John was the baby, I do understand. My mom saw it in the Toronto Star and said, oh, the McDermott family from Glasgow. That's the McDermotts that lived on our street in Woods Hill in Glasgow. And that was it. We never saw them or anything. And when there's a show in Saskatchewan they do every year in the 1990s, I was doing that show, and on the plane over, I met John, and we said, our moms know each other, right, from Glasgow. And that began our friendship that's been ongoing ever since. And that's why, we had the mutual love of hockey and music, and, and the fact that we actually met as babies.
Honestly, that's a mind blow. I love it.
Yeah, it is.
So it's interesting because Larry, you're with Styx now. We talked about spoons earlier. Gord Depp is in Flock of Seagulls.
Yeah. Yes, he is.
Yeah, he is. And then Vince Incorporated wanted to know which Canadian keyboardist had the better 80s new wave hair, you or Rob Pruce? Who, by the way, I talked to yesterday. He's actually making the trip up to Canada just to attend TMLXX on September 1st. So if there's any scenario where you and Rob are doing some keyboard jam together, let me know. But this is happening. Rob Pruce at TMLXX.
That's very cool. Well, yeah, Rob is. Look, I'm not going to make the claim, okay? But I do know that a few years back, and maybe it's the same now. I haven't Googled it in a while. But if you Google greatest mullets of the 1980s, I was number 7 on the top 10, just behind John Stamos.
Wow.
And I don't like to brag, but I think it was better than Stamos's. Maybe not as good as Rob's, but I think mine was kind of bulletproof.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of your mullet, man. Honestly,
Yeah.
no one can touch you as far as I'm
Oh, it's
concerned.
coming
Okay,
back.
so here, rapid fire fight. We're gonna get this in. Rock Golf. Rock Golf said he loved your. Speaking of spoons, it's all about spoons now. He loved your
Yeah,
cover
sure.
of Areas and Symphonies.
Oh, thank you.
How did that come to be?
Gord Depp asked if I'd contributed a song to their tribute album, where they have artists from around the world that do their favorite spoon song. I bought Areas and Symphonies actually right when Rheingold was breaking up, so I'm pulling that back together. I really, really like that record, particularly like that song, and it's got it's an unusual lyric. That's what I really like about it. An unusual allegory, or whatever you call it, or comparison to an aria and a symphony, right? And boys and girls, and the male-female difference of how they're raised. That's the way I interpret the lyric anyway. And so I was happy to do it. It was during our lockdown times, and I was always happy to do some interesting little project. I did one for Bon Jovi, did Living on a Prayer. And there's several out there actually, but I think my favorite of them all was Arias and Symphonies.
Love it. By the way, so Sandy Horn, Gord Depp, and Rob Pruce, all FOTMs like yourself. So there you go. What did you think of Speaking of FOTMs, what did you think of Maestro Fresh Wes's? He did like a Criminal Mind back in 05. He did.
I loved it. First of all, there's another Scarborough guy, and Wes. Yeah, Wes in this very room here. He actually, yeah, there you go. Yeah, and the first
pulling up my 12 inches. Everybody who's listening to the podcast here,
man, he made my backbone slide. I'm just going to tell you, that's all that happened. Wes came over when he was thinking about doing the song. He came over and actually asked me in person, do you mind if I used, and in this very room here, wow. It was one of the coolest days of my life because Dylan was like 11 years old or 12 years old then. And he came home from school at lunch, and I had like the coolest rapper in Canadian history, the originator of that whole thing, sitting right here, going through, talking over A Criminal Mind, and doing the whole rap, and then we did the video together. I'm in the video of Wes's. He called it Criminal Minded, right. And so I'm actually a much darker version than the 80s. Put it that right. way. I mean, I finally donned the orange jumpsuit I've been dreaming of all my life.
Right. Wes is living in New Brunswick now.
Is he really? Last time I spoke to him, he was in Vancouver, so he's jumping around. That's good.
I guess during the pandemic, he and his son moved to New Brunswick, I guess.
I have other friends that have moved there as well. I love New Brunswick. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, Jake the Snake. Saw you, not me, we saw you, Gowan, when you visited Ancaster High as a Rock Express promo. Saw you at Gage Park and Lulu's. Will you ever tour solo in Canada again?
Well, I do tour solo in Canada. Just a few weeks ago, I played Calgary, Regina, Winnipeg, and then we did an outdoor show in Peterborough. I have about 10 shows coming up at the end of this year, all in Southern Ontario. So you'll have plenty of opportunity in November, December to see that, yes, I do still tour solo. Ancaster High, yes, they won the contest with Rock Express magazine, now known as Music Express. And that was the most essential magazine to get in Canada in the 1980s. I actually got to be on the cover once, which was great. And I'm still in touch with people in that magazine. Anyway, there were all kinds of contests back then to have people come to your high school. And I wound up going to Ancaster. And I remember the student that brought me there, her name was Jody Lewis. And to this day, I'm still in touch with her. Wow. So it's amazing how long the connections go and how far back. But I do remember that day in Ancaster High School. It was lots of fun. I even remember one of the questions that I got from one of the students was kind of being sarcastic, but just asked, how much hairspray do I have to take on the road with me? And I remember having to answer that in a mock serious manner so that I didn't, upset the kid. I didn't quite know how to take it at the time, but the answer was quite a lot. Kind of like a, if you take a case of 2-4 beer, Molson, 24 beer.
No, we only drink Great Lakes Brewery on.
Well, that's great because we're all microbrewery now. Back then it was Molson sur la Basse.
Right.
That's all. And so I figured, like, imagine a case of beer. Imagine that full of hairspray, and that's how you got through the 1980s until the grunge people came in, and you were no longer cool enough to be on CFN.
Well, then you just didn't shower at all. Yeah, you're no longer on CFNY. They're not showering. That's the look. Larry, I love this so much, man. Thanks so much for this great conversation. I loved it.
Tons of fun. Thanks, Eric Alper, for getting me in touch with you. I love doing stuff at home like this. With the opportunity, I don't normally do it because I'm doing most of the Styx stuff on the road. Right. By the way, the latest Styx album, Crash of the Crown, is back on the top. It was number 21 on Billboard's rock album chart just when we last week. So we continue on our tour, summer tour, in a few days, starting off in Virginia Beach. And so things are still alive and rocking, and Gowan is still touring, and Styx are still touring. And come out and see a show, and go see Nope, and buy Strange Animal again.